So I've been checking myself lately because I don't want to fall into hyperbole. I don't want my biases to be too affected by others. Everyone has their bias. I just want to make sure that my bias is coming from me, not from anyone else. I've been wanting to make sure that I'm not just falling into pure rage over everything, or that I'm being too hard on stuff because I just want to make sure that I give the best, most accurate representation of these movies in my review that I can, and that I have the most accurate assessment I can, coming from my own bias. Those two things sound like they contradict each other. I'm all over the place in the beginning of this review. My point is, I'm trying not to call everything the worst thing ever. I'm trying not to say that this is the worst movie I've ever seen. This is the worst show I've ever seen, because I want to consider, just like, you can't say that all the time and cry wolf all the time. You can't be so angry at everything all the time that everything becomes the worst. I want to make sure that I measure when I say that something is the worst. That said, there were multiple times that I watched Joker, Folie, Deux, and I thought, this is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. This is possibly the worst movie of the year. To be fair, I have not seen Megalopolis yet. But I thought to myself, you need to stop being hyperbolic. You need to stop saying that every bad experience you might have with a show, every horrible experience you might have with a show or movie is the worst ever. And so I really started to think about that when I was thinking of my review coming up. But when the movie ended and I went and saw it with my dad turned to me and said, that was one of the worst movies I've ever seen. And we were almost in an empty theater watching this film. There were two other guys in the theater, and one of them got up and walked out in the middle of it. Um, so that is maybe an idea of the experience that you have with Joker 2 Fully a Duh. I don't care if I pronounce it right or not. This once again might be the worst movie of the year that I've seen so far. And mind you, I saw Borderlands. I saw Madam Web. I saw Argyle, which up to this point was what I considered the worst movie of the year. Borderlands got like 0% when it debuted on Rotten Tomatoes. And I was disappointed when I watched it that it wasn't even worse than it was, and it wasn't laughably bad. It was just bad. Even though it was a bad movie, I wanted it to be interestingly bad. Madam Web, I actually was entertained by, because it was one of those so bad it's good movies. But Joker to Filet Deux is an interestingly bad movie, where so much throughout it, my brain was going, how? How did this get made at any point? And once again, even with 39% on Rotten Tomatoes as of this recording, 38 from audiences, I don't think that they've been harsh enough. I don't think that they've really expressed how bad this movie is, and I will try to do that here. I think that Borderlands deserved maybe the 20% or 30%, and that this movie is what deserved the 0 to 6% for its Rotten Tomatoes score. This is one of the most baffling is a good word for it, bafflingly awful movies that I've seen in a very long time. Once again, recency bias. I don't want to say it's the worst movie I've ever seen, but it felt like one of the worst when I watched it, and it felt like perhaps the worst movie of the year when I watched it, just as an initial experience. So now that I've said that for the past 4 minutes, getting into the actual review, I just want to say, don't waste your money on this movie. Don't spend your money at the theater. Don't waste your time on it. I would recommend that you don't even watch this when it comes out on streaming. It is the biggest waste of time, the biggest time sucker that you will ever experience this year. And I would say that it is very insulting to all members of the audience. Not, a lot of reviews were saying beforehand that it is insulting to the audience that like Joker. It is insulting to anybody who would dare waste their time to even watch this film. And I was a person who was trying to defend it initially because I hated the idea of the first Joker. Joker should not have an origin. I saw it very clearly as a guy co-opting the franchise for his own. Eventually, I did watch the movie on streaming and I thought it was good. So I'm like, well, maybe at the very least, this will be a good movie. Like, even like as a fan of films, I wanted to even give the very confusing musical choice a chance because I'm like, maybe there'll be something artistic and interesting about it. And maybe a lot of people were saying maybe it'll be like Martin Scorsese's New York, New York. Maybe it'll be a ripoff of that in the way the first one was a ripoff of Taxi Driver. All your worst expectations about turning this into a musical are true. All your worst expectations about what this could be are true. This is very much a film for no one, and it just made me question how and why did it get made? How did any producer agree to this? And a lot of people are using the words that this movie is a troll because, just scrambling to try to figure out what this is and why it got made and that it's a troll of anyone who would dare watch it. It's perhaps a troll of the studios who would dare greenlight this. But let us get into the description of the movie at last and why it is so bafflingly awful and how it's gone from the idea of being an Oscars contender to being, I think, deserving of the Raspberry Award this year. If any movie deserved the Raspberry Award this year for being the most bafflingly awful movie, then it's this one. Because I understand what Madam Web and Argyle and Borderlands are, even if they're awful movies. I don't understand what this is. So, the first thing to get out of the way and just what a horrible experience this film is that there is literally no story. Literally. I can't express that enough. There was nothing that they had to say with this movie except for one thing. It was very clear that they had no story in mind. In fact, behind the scenes, Lady Gaga admitted that they would just write scenes when they were in the trailer for the morning. They essentially had no script. They were just making things up as they went along. And boy, can I see this. 99% of the scenes in this movie don't need to happen. There's only one scene that has any relevance to anything that I think Todd Phillips actually wanted to say with it. What you get in this movie is scene after scene recapping the events of the first movie or recapping events that you just watched in this movie as if much happens at all. For example, it starts out with a cartoon recapping Joker's appearance on the Murray Franklin show, and I like the cartoon opening that kind of harkens back to the way a lot of 80s movies would open up with cartoons. But trust me, anything that could possibly be seen as good in this film will be torn down because while the recap is pretty good and it gives the idea that there's just like Arthur and the Joker are two separate people and it was the Joker that took over in that moment. That's ruined in the next 20 minutes because like the next 20 minutes are more scenes recapping what happened on the Murray Franklin show. And this is how slow it is. It'll be somebody asking Arthur, did you kill Murray Franklin? Long pause. Yes. Did you mean to kill Murray Franklin? Long pause. Yes. That is not word for word everything that happens in the scenes, but that gives you an idea. It is just this slow reconfirmation of events that we already saw, and we will go from one scene reconfirming events and actions that we already saw in the first film to the next scene that reconfirms the events and actions that we saw in the first film. I think it's the first like 30 minutes. How many scenes we got that were just reconfirming the events that happened on the Murray Franklin show with a cartoon opening for those events, but also that cartoon opening that gives the idea that Joker and Arthur are two separate people is completely torn down in the film because the film is against the idea that Joker and Arthur are two separate people, and that he has two personalities for himself and is not responsible for his actions. So I'm like, that opening didn't even thematically mean anything because that's not what your movie is actually saying, if it's saying anything at all. So that gives you maybe the first bit of idea about what it's like to watch this film. One scene recapping the events that you didn't need another explanation for, just talking about them from the first film. The next scene recapping events from the first scene. Another scene, maybe something will finally happen, and then you'll get a scene directly after that that recaps the scene you just watched. Like, there is literally a moment in the film, and this is full spoilers because you should not watch this movie. There's a moment in the film where Arthur wants to defend himself in court, and we'll get to that in a minute because the court stuff does not make any sense. But so he defends himself in court. He's going to do that. The following scene, or like a couple scenes over, is him sitting in the car listening to the news report of somebody explaining to the audience what just happened. The scene that we just saw where he's going to defend himself. It's like, why do we need an entire scene recapping the plot development that we just got? When we just saw it play out, we didn't need another person to explain it to us again. But I hope that that is enough to give you an idea of what it's like to watch this film. Just constant recapping, little to no, and most of the times no movement on the plot. And it just says, we had no story to tell. We had no plot. Joker was never supposed to have a sequel, and it has never showed more in any movie that wasn't supposed to have a sequel than this one, that they had no script, they had no story, they had nothing to say. The most they can do is just talk about the first movie and recap them. That's what you get, because most of this movie, and like the first 30 to 40 minutes is Arthur and Arkham, and then the rest of it is the court stuff. And the court stuff is mostly just talking about the first movie, reconfirming events that happened there, or talking about things that we didn't even need to know about. Like, do we need to know that the little midget that Arthur didn't kill went to the cops and was in custody after that happened? No, we didn't need to know that. Did we need to know that Sophie didn't call the police? That's Arthur's neighbor. That she didn't need to call the police, or sorry, can't talk. She didn't call the police after he left? No, we didn't need to know that perspective. These perspectives are not adding anything to the story. They're just meaningless bits of presumptory, I don't even know if that's a word. They're just meaningless bits of information, and they're there along with everything else. The repetition of everything in order to pad out and pretend that there's a movie here when there's not. And that's the first thing I want to talk about, is that this is such a waste of time. It wants to pretend that it's a movie, but it's not in any way, shape, or form. These scenes that exist, just like, well, we have a camera and we're going to call this movie Joker, just repeat events that happened in the first film, just talk about anything. We're just going to have every person who was in the first movie come back and talk about those events. Like, that is the first insult, that it is such a waste of time for a movie to pretend it's a movie like this and pretend that there was any sort of story to tell when there's not. It's what makes me think that it was a troll on Todd Phillips' part, if we're giving him credit. On the studios, like, oh, the studios, they'll let me make anything as long as it says Joker on it, because they let me make the first movie because it said Joker on it. That is the first insult of this, and that is most of the movie that I am describing. Recaps of either things that happened in the first film, not offering any insight or development on them, or recaps of the little events that you just watched in the film. For example, again, let's talk about Harley Quinzel and the version of the character in this movie. Possibly the only thing, the reason why I wanted to be optimistic about it, the only thing I had any interest of it. You'll get a scene in the beginning, and it's the only substantial scene between Arthur and Lee, because it is the only one that you can confirm actually happened. Arthur and Lee share one conversation about how Lee admires Arthur because of a TV movie that she watched about him, and that she also agrees with his nihilism or his murderous tendencies and all this stuff. One scene of that. Then every scene of Arthur and Lee for the next long sequence is either them singing or scenes just reconfirming how obsessed they are with each other and just saying, "I'm in love and I feel better now." There's literally a song sequence about that, singing about how they're in love and how they feel better now, and then it segues to another scene that is all about a song sequence all about how they're in love now and they feel better, to another scene that's talking about how they're in love now and how they feel better. Like, it is repetitive, and not to mention we got a scene even before that, which was a song sequence about how Arthur feels better now that he's met Lee after one conversation. Once again, repetition over and over again, and not developing anything at all about these characters. And Lee, before we talk about the musical elements, she's not even really a character in this film. Like, she's in more scenes than I was expecting, but she never gets any development. She's never fleshed out. There's the idea that most of the scenes, and this is what also makes it very pointless, is it seems that most of the scenes that happen between Joker and Lee are all in his head, or that he's at the very least exaggerating them to what they don't mean. Like, she's obviously not there in his cell. They mentioned that later. He's exaggerating that. The only bit of development we get on her throughout the entire film is the idea that she's actually a rich person who may or may not be insane. They say that she checked herself in and out of the asylum, so clearly she's not crazy enough to have committed crimes, but that the idea that she's maybe a person who's just using him to make fun of him, another person beating him down. And it got to the point where at the end I was like, I don't know what they're trying to say with this character, and perhaps we need more context for that. But you need to understand that Lee is not a character. We don't understand what makes her tick. We don't really understand who she is. And most of the scenes we get are just skewed from Arthur's fantasies, so we don't even really know who she is as a person. And it's like, what was giving Arthur another fantasy girlfriend like in the first film really saying about him? But so repetition, a character who was made as the main selling point of this film, who is barely a character in this film at all. And that's another thing. The marketing made it seem like this would be like a Bonnie and Clyde movie, but it's not at all. Like, Lee is the B plot, and does she influence Arthur a bit? I guess, sort of. But she's like the B plot, this all other movie that's playing with this film with musical sequences that didn't need to be there. Like, I think you could cut out all of Lee's scenes and all of the musical sequences, and this would be the same film, because ultimately it's not a Bonnie and Clyde movie. That's just, it felt like more filler. That's the thing. This is ultimately a court drama that is rehashing the events of the first film, and the stuff with Lee and the musical elements feel like filler. The more and more filler upon filler, just to try to pad out the movie and make it feel like there's an actual movie there when it's not. And let's get to the musical sequences now. Any hope that anyone had that the musical sequences would be interesting or well done or artistic, out the door. We spend the first 20 minutes of the film with Arthur in very much the same tone of the first movie, where he's literally just being abused by guards. Then he has one conversation with Lee and he breaks out into song. And it is not motivated by the story at all, because he's only had one conversation with somebody who is a musical therapy doctor who says, sing if you feel like it. It might make you feel better. They just have one conversation about that, and it never comes up again in the film. And apparently that is enough to make Arthur break into these song breaks in his head at these various intervals of the film. And I'm like, that's not motivated by the story, because music in the real world is barely having any influence on Arthur. Like, they only had one conversation with the musical therapy teacher, barely even that. So and when he breaks out into song and starts singing these Frank Sinatra songs, these old-timey songs, it is tonally so at odds with everything else. I can't say that it's really artistic in saying his escape, his escape from reality, because it clashes so much with everything else in the film. I'm like, if you had no idea this was a musical and you walked into this, you would be baffled out of your mind that this keeps happening, because it just does not fit and does not justify itself in any way, shape, or form. The other way it doesn't justify itself is, as I mentioned before, the musical sequences don't move the story forward. Rule number one of a musical, the musical sequences are supposed to move the story forward and supposed to express what what the characters can't express with words. That is not what this movie does. It literally uses the musical sequences to reiterate events and reiterate how characters are supposed to be feeling again and again and again, even multiple songs just conveying the exact same feeling. Really, all of the songs from, except one from Arthur and Lee, just convey the same thing, that they're in love now and this is their escape. That is the same thing. It just repeats itself over and over throughout the film in these Frank Sinatra sequences. That's what they're feeling. The musical is more filler, but it's so baffling at odds with everything else in the tone of this very dour, boring, that is the word, boring film, that it's just, you're just sitting there like, what am I watching? When you've got a sequence from the courtroom of Zazie Beetz' character repeating the events of the first film in very slow fashion, not revealing anything really substantial. And then it just breaks out into this weird 1930s, 40s song sequence, and it's just so baffling. It's like an acid trip, but on in a bad way. It's like more of everything with this together. What I've said so far, the recapping of everything, the boring sequences, how everything seems to be filler, whether it's scenes just reiterating other scenes or scenes from the first movie, or the musical sequences that do the same thing, or the fact that Lee isn't really a character in this film, and most of what she and Arthur had seem to be more delusions in his mind. It all makes the question of, how did this get made? This isn't a movie. The choices made don't have any artistic merit. They're not really doing anything. There's no story here. That's how you start to ask questions of how it got made in the first place, and start to wonder, was this all a troll on Todd Phillips' part? Not among just the audience, but among the studio. Him going, if I slap Joker on anything, they'll give me a massive paycheck and I can do literally anything with it. I can make it a musical and they'll still allow me to do it. Perhaps that's giving him a lot of credit. But once again, I gave full spoilers. There's only one scene that says anything that the movie, I think, wanted to say. And this gets into the element that they were talking about in reviews, about how it feels like this movie hates the audience that liked the first movie, or wants to distance themselves from it. I would say the movie did not feel as vindictive as they made it out to be, and that's because barely any of it is focused on telling a theme or doing anything of substance. There are very blatant lines through it, like or scenes, like in the beginning when you have Joker look like a celebrity when he comes out, or talk about how he literally says people only care about sensationalism in the film. But and it does seem to be making kind of jabs at the idea that Joker has this fan base that only cares about him as the Joker and not about him being a mentally ill man, which I guess is how Todd Phillips projects is what the first fan base who saw his film thought, as if we didn't understand his themes about mental illness and were the ones defending him. So that's kind of insulting, but that he would think that we, the ones who supported the first movie, or at least the people who did, because I didn't watch it until streaming, didn't understand his film because they were the ones that didn't defend it. But it doesn't feel like he's being, at least to me, that he's being hateful or vindictive about it, more than he's dealing with a fan base he doesn't understand. Todd Phillips is not a comic book fan. He doesn't know the Joker fan base. He doesn't understand it. His information about who the Joker fan base seems to come from the media, that they're a bunch of people who just care about the killer clown carving up his face and killing people, and that they don't care about a guy suffering from mental illness. But he seems to have that perception thanks to the media, and his reaction to it seems to be like, hey, I'm not involved with those people, like, don't take this out on me. Like, it's like when the first movie, when the backlash was really getting rough, that forced Todd Phillips to come out and saying, hey, this isn't an actual Joker film. This is just me doing what he would call a real film under the guise of a comic book film. That's what he said. That was him trying to distance himself from the Joker brand that he co-opted in the first place, once he saw what that came with, once that came with the backlash, because Joker is a character that for years now has been accused of making people want to murder people and all of that. And once Todd Phillips realized that that was what the baggage that came with co-opting the Joker property, he wanted to distance himself from it. And that's what it feels like in this movie, that it's not so much about trying to attack fans of the Joker more than it is about Todd Phillips trying to distance himself, just like he did in that interview, and go, hey, I'm not involved with any of these weirdo Joker fans you're telling me about. I was just co-opting a brand. And that's what that feels like, because the only scene that has any relevance in this film is when Arthur says, there is no Joker, I'm just a loser. And that's what it feels like, the only thing that Todd Phillips really wanted to say with this film. All of the musical sequences, all of the padding, and really everything in this film is padding. Lee's existence and Lady Gaga being in this film at all, it's all padding as an excuse to make a film, to make a profit, because he thinks, and he was right, that the studio would greenlight anything with Joker's name on it. It's all, the only thing he wants to say is that he's not really involved with the Joker fan base, and that Arthur Fleck was not really the Joker. In real life, it was all just a brand that he co-opted to make money. And that's not said in the film, but that's what he's trying to do with it. The only thing he wants to do is to distance himself from that. And that, with what he's doing in this film, what little that he's doing, that completely destroys the first film. Like, I've never had it before where a film that I at the very least respected, like, I thought that the first Joker film was well done. Other people have different opinions. I thought that it was well done. But this is the first time where a sequel has actively made me think maybe I should just get rid of my Joker Blu-ray because it's of no value to me, because this movie goes against the idea. It goes against that idea of a cautionary tale about how society treats the mentally ill. It goes against the idea that we should be careful we don't create our own monsters because we don't attend to mental illness. That's what it was all about. This goes back on the idea of pointing fingers and being a cautionary tale, because it's not a cautionary tale and just says, look, the Joker, or not the Joker, he's not the Joker, he's just Arthur Fleck, a sad loser, and in the end he just gets stabbed and dies, and that's all he is, and all of this sensationalism shouldn't have existed. That's all it is. It completely tears down the idea of the first film. From the very first scene, it removes the idea that the Joker ever became a psychopath, because he's right back to the way he was in the beginning of the first movie, where he's just a sad man with a mental illness that no one cares about and everyone beats on. So it completely goes back on that theme of the first film. Why? Because Todd Phillips got insecure that co-opting the Joker property made it so that everyone started taking the baggage of the Joker's character and accusations that that character turns people into serial killers and makes them shoot up people and all of that. He had to work with that baggage then, and now this movie is just him wanting to tear that all down and separate it from it. I also heard the theory that maybe Todd Phillips put a lot of himself in the first film and now he's embarrassed and wants to go back on that. I don't know. At the very least, we can say that he feels ashamed of the first film, and that this movie is him trying to go back on all that, perhaps to get his reputation back amongst the people he wants it from, which I guess is the media that criticized the first movie and gave him that impression of the people that supported it. I don't know, but that's what the only thing that feels like he has a purpose of doing. And it doesn't make sense because Arthur doesn't really have an arc. Like, he's just kind of in his own head about Lee for a point in the film. And then there's one point where he gets angry at something that's said in court and he wants to defend himself. And he does a terrible job of it and doesn't really say anything new. But eventually he sees he gets beat again when he goes back to Arkham Asylum and somebody gets killed by the evil, guards who have been abusing him, and for whatever reason that is what breaks him and makes him not want to have the Joker persona anymore. So it wasn't really an arc, it was just stuff that happened near the end of the film. And Harley reveals at the end, and you don't get a lot of the scenes. Like, you don't get the scene of her singing on the stairs like you got in set photos. So many of the scenes in the trailers with Harley and from the set photos don't exist in this. She might as well not be a character in the film. She might as well, the musical sequences shouldn't exist because they're not what's actually saying something about Arthur. Because when I got to the end, I'm like, okay, Arthur doesn't actually love the Joker. She only thought that he was fun as the Joker, and she doesn't care about Arthur Fleck. I think that that's what they're saying. We don't really get any much fleshing out of her motives or who she actually is as a person. And so it made me think, with that scene of Lady Gaga at the end, very briefly, I'm like, what was the purpose of her character? And what with saying that the Joker doesn't exist and Arthur's just a sad clown, like, what are you trying to say with her? Or is she a representation of the audience that only cares about the Joker if he's Joker? I don't know. I don't know what the purpose of her character was, because we didn't really ever flesh her out at all. I don't really know anything about her. I don't know who she is. And then the ending, which is out now, and I knew about this before, is that after all this, another inmate stabs the Joker to death. And if you look in the background with him, kind of fuzzed out, he's out of focus, he's carving an old smile into his face, which I guess was supposed to be Todd Phillips' nod that, okay, this wasn't the real Joker, but hey, you idiot comic book fans, here's the real Joker all along, and you can take that, and hey, people bought into the stuff with Thomas and Bruce Wayne in the first film that didn't fit, maybe they'll buy into this. But the thing is, you don't even really see it because it's kind of faded into the background, so the ending kind of comes off as, and then he died, and then that's it. And so it just feels, that scene, and I'm less shocked about it because I knew it was coming, but that scene makes you feel like, okay, this movie didn't have anything to say, I guess, against except maybe going back on the every theme of the first film and tearing that down and making it feel like you should never watch it again. But then he just dies, and it's the ultimate feeling of this entire movie was pointless. It was a waste of your time. It was a waste of everyone's time. It was mostly just filler, and then some of that filler was just outright baffling, like the musical sequences that aren't even original songs, aren't even saying anything about the story. They're just songs that I guess relate to the feeling Arthur gets from Lee, that now he has found love, which is the same thing that he felt with his neighbor in the first movie. It's not saying anything new. It's completely pointless. And the idea, like, they did it with having that guy faded into the background, carving a smile on his face after killing Arthur. They did it with a guy called Harvey Dent, who has nothing to do with Harvey Dent, who you see in a little shot has like scars on the side of his face. But this movie has even less to do with the Batman mythos and the Joker than the first movie somehow. Like, you don't feel at any point that you're watching a Batman-related thing. Like, even there were some parts of the first Joker that felt like it kind of related to other Batman stories, even if that wasn't the intention. But this just has everything devoid. Like, Harley Quinzel, even though it's mentioned at one point that she like was going for a degree in psychiatry or something, nothing to do with Harley. Shouldn't even be considered a version of Harley. Harvey, nothing to do with Harvey Dent, Two-Face, Arthur Fleck, nothing to do with Joker. This has nothing to do with Batman characters, even less so than the first film. It's literally just incidentally called Joker, and I don't even know why it's called Folie à Deux, Madness for Two, because it's not really about Arthur and Lee's story either. It's a movie about nothing that has no reason to exist, I guess, except for Todd Phillips wanting to distance himself from the controversy of the first film and just completely go against everything he was trying to say. And I would assume, because when you watch a film this baffling that seems to have no purpose, your mind is just trying to reach for some sort of understanding of why it was made. Maybe it was him trolling the studio, that they would make him make even the cluster that this movie is, as long as it had Joker slapped on it, because that's how they made the first movie. So this film, I can't believe that Lady Gaga let herself be a part of this, given what role she ultimately had, or that she's not angry that this is her role in the ultimate cut of this film. I think that this film has ruined the reputation of everyone involved with it. Todd Phillips, Joaquin Phoenix, Lady Gaga, though maybe she'll be made out to be more of the victim of this film thanks to how she's portrayed. Joaquin Phoenix, the rumor is, was the one who insisted it be a musical. He has got some mental problems going on with how he's been acting behind the scenes lately. I think that this might ruin his career along with the other stuff that's been happening with him. This might ruin Todd Phillips' career, because that is just how bad this film is. It insults anybody who dared give it a chance as an artistic endeavor, because it's not that. It insults anybody who wanted to give it a chance as a movie, because it's not that. It insults anybody who wanted to give it a chance as a comic book related thing, because it's not that. It insults anybody who liked the first film and appreciated these themes, because this one completely goes against those themes and seems to abuse Arthur as much as the people in the first film did. So I wash my hands of it. I wash my hands of it. I probably will get rid of my Joker Blu-ray someday, just because, I'm very particular about my Blu-ray collection and just having the best films. Maybe I'll keep it just for collector's sake. But I'm very particular about the kinds of films I keep in my collection. But yeah, after talking about it for this long, potentially the worst movie of the year. Don't see it. It will completely waste your time in every way, shape, and form. I can't even think of it. Like, I was just hoping maybe it'll be a backdoor way to get a different version of Harley that maybe has some depth. Has nothing to do with Harley. She's not in it at all. She's barely in it, and when she is, she's not really a character. Okay, I'm messing up. She is in it. It's just that when she is, she's barely a character. And so she might as well not be in it. And she has nothing to do with Harley whatsoever. Doesn't have any depth as a character. She's just there. So, and apparently the industry is having a meltdown right now because of this doing so badly at the box office. Like, they're surprised of it. It's like, you guys got played for fools for thinking that this was ever going to be successful as a musical. With the word of mouth that this would no doubt get once people heard what it was, even if it ever had a chance to open well, because whatever this is going to get in its opening weekend is going to drop like a rock when people see it. this is not even a film. It's at the very most generous, a troll job on Todd Phillips' part, and at the very least, just a horrible movie that isn't even a movie, shouldn't have even been made, didn't really have much to say. What Todd Phillips wants to say in this movie, he could have said in an interview or a tweet. Waste of money for the studios, and you know what? They 100% deserve the box office bomb at this point because they were foolish enough to make it, and they were foolish enough to create something that's so insulting to its entire audience. Not just people who enjoyed and defended the first movie, but I'm talking about the entire audience, the critics, anybody who might be foolish enough to watch this film, and unfortunate enough. And it's just this is the most soulless movie that I've ever seen. Like, this is the pinnacle of taking something, taking an IP just to make money off of it, because this isn't even a film, but they thought that it would sell just because it's attached to an IP. Like, the first Joker movie was a film, at least. And but this is like, even more than The Lion King 2019, this is the most soulless film I've ever seen. The absolute pinnacle of taking an IP and slamming it on something and thinking that alone is going to make it sell. And maybe they took their entire audience for fools, thinking that would work this time around. And I was taken for a fool trying to have any optimism for this thing. But, yeah, don't give them any money. This movie is just insulting for you. It has nothing, even less than the first film, nothing to do with the Joker. It has no artistic merits. It's not really a story. And, Lady Gaga isn't a character enough in the film to really have anything worth seeing. And the musical sequences aren't worth seeing either. And they have no purpose. And I actually just kind of get mad thinking about the time that was wasted by me on this film. Even though it's my job to review it, I just still feel like I wasted my time. But luckily, lots of other things to enjoy these days. I am really enjoying X-Men comics. I recently saw a movie, The Wild Robot. I think that everyone should go see. Transformers 1, also a great animated movie. Spend your money on people who really cared about what they were doing. The Wild Robot, great animated movie, great story. I think I'll see it again. Transformers 1 really cares about that property. Go see those films. Don't waste your time on Joker 2 Folie, duh. But that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you, patrons, as always, for supporting this channel. If you would like to support me and my opinions on this channel, please check out the link in the description. And also, there are links to my social media if you want to follow me on there. Thank you all for watching. Please do not see Joker 2, and I will see you guys next time.